Hey everyone, my name's Mike. I'm a regular guy living in suburban Denver, Colorado. I grew up here, went to the University of Colorado Boulder, and after graduation, I landed a job as an IT specialist at a local tech firm. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me enough time to enjoy life outside of work. That I met Sarah at a neighborhood barbecue about 6 years ago. She was friends with one of my co-workers, and we hit it off right away. She had this infectious laugh that made everything seem brighter, and she was always full of energy. We started dating shortly after, and things moved pretty quickly from there. Within 2 years, we were married, and a year later, we welcomed our son, Jake, into the world. Life seemed perfect: a loving wife, a beautiful kid, a cozy house in a nice neighborhood. What more could I ask for? But lately, things have been different. Over the past few months, Sarah has become increasingly distant. She spends more time on her phone, often texting or scrolling through social media late into the night. She's also been coming home later from work, claiming she has extra meetings or errands to run. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone gets busy sometimes, right? But then I started noticing little things: her perfume smelling different, her clothes looking more expensive than usual, and her general attitude towards me becoming colder and more dismissive. It wasn't just the changes in behavior that bothered me. It was the way she acted when I asked about them. Every time I brought up any of these issues, she would get defensive, snapping at me like I was accusing her of something ridiculous. "You're being paranoid," she'd say, rolling her eyes. "Can't you trust me?" I wanted to believe her, I really did. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And then, one day, everything changed. So, there I was, minding my own business on a Friday evening. Jake had just finished his football practice, and Sarah was supposed to pick him up because I had to work late that day. When I got home around 8 p.m., the house was eerily quiet. No lights were on, and there was no sign of either Sarah or Jake. I figured they must have gone out for dinner or something. Sarah had been doing that a lot lately, taking Jake out without telling me. I decided to check my phone to see if she had texted me about their whereabouts. As I scrolled through my messages, I noticed one from her that I hadn't seen before. It was a simple, "Jake's with me. Don't wait up." Nothing unusual about that, right? But something about it felt off. Maybe it was the timing, or maybe it was the way she phrased it. Whatever it was, it made me uneasy. I set my phone down and went to grab a beer from the fridge. As I opened the door, I noticed something strange: a faint scent of perfume lingering in the air. Not Sarah's usual scent, but something more masculine, more musky. My heart started racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I sat down on the couch, trying to calm myself down, when I heard a noise outside. I looked out the window and saw Sarah pulling into the driveway. She got out of the car, laughing and chatting with someone. At first, I couldn't see who it was, but then the person stepped out of the shadows. It was Coach Ryan, Jake's football coach. My stomach dropped. What the hell was going on? I watched as Sarah leaned in close to Ryan, whispering something to him. He smiled and gave her a quick hug before getting back into his car and driving off. Sarah walked towards the house, her face glowing with a kind of happiness I hadn't seen in months. As soon as she walked through the door, I confronted her. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She blinked, surprised at my tone. "Oh, it's just Coach Ryan. Jake forgot his cleats at practice, so I went to pick them up." "Coach Ryan?" I repeated, my blood boiling. "You were hugging him like your best friends. And why does your hair smell like his cologne?" Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms defensively. "Are you seriously accusing me of something, Mike? You're being ridiculous." "I'm not accusing you of anything," I said, my voice rising. "But I think it's pretty clear that something's going on between you two." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You're paranoid. There's nothing going on. Can't you trust me?" That was the moment I knew I had to dig deeper. If she was going to lie to my face like that, I needed proof. I waited until she went upstairs to put Jake to bed and then grabbed her phone off the kitchen counter. Her passcode was still the same. It was our wedding date, something she had never changed. I unlocked the phone and started scrolling through her texts. What I found made my blood run cold. There were dozens of messages between her and Coach Ryan, filled with flirty banter and explicit references to sex. They had been meeting up after Jake's practices, sneaking off to hotels, and even planning weekend getaways together. Every message was a punch to the gut, each one more painful than the last. That I couldn't believe what I was reading. How could she do this to me? To us? To Jake? The betrayal cut deep, and I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. That I was still holding Sarah's phone in my shaking hands when she came back downstairs. She must have noticed the look on my face because her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw something flicker across her expression. Guilt? Fear? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that familiar coldness. "Mike," she said, her voice sharp, "what are you doing with my phone?" I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, staring at her, trying to process everything I had just read. How could she betray me like this? With Jake's football coach, of all people. Finally, I found my voice. "You're having an affair with Coach Ryan, aren't you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She blinked, feigning surprise. "What are you talking about? You've lost your mind. Don't play dumb with me, Sarah." I snapped, louder now. "I saw the texts. I know what's been going on. How long has this been happening? How long have you been sleeping with him?" Her face flushed red, but she didn't back down. Instead, she crossed her arms and glared at me. "You went through my phone? That's a violation of privacy, Mike. You have no right." "No right?" I repeated, incredulous. "No right? After everything you've done, after all the lies, you think I don't have the right to know the truth?" She sighed dramatically, as if I was being unreasonable. "It's not what you think. Ryan and I were just friends. We've been helping each other out, okay? He's been going through some stuff, and I've been there for him. That's all." "That's all?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You call sneaking off to hotels and planning weekend getaways helping each other out? What about all the messages about sex, Sarah? How do you explain those?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "Those were just jokes, Mike. Innocent flirting. Nothing serious." "Innocent flirting?" I shouted, unable to hold back any longer. "You call sending nudes and making plans to meet up innocent flirting? You've been cheating on me, Sarah. With our son's football coach. How could you do this to us?" She flinched at the volume of my voice but quickly recovered, her expression hardening. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It's not like you're perfect either. Maybe if you paid more attention to me instead of always working late, I wouldn't have needed someone else." "Needed someone else?" I repeated, stunned. "So, this is my fault? You're blaming me for your affair?" "Yes, Mike," she spat, her eyes narrowing. "Maybe if you weren't so boring and predictable, I wouldn't have looked elsewhere. You never take me anywhere, never surprise me. Ryan understands me. He knows what I need." The words hit me like a slap in the face. So, that's how she saw me? As boring? Predictable? I thought back to all the times I had tried to make her happy, cooking her favorite meals, taking her out on dates, even sacrificing my own time to spend more time with her. None of it mattered now. She had thrown it all away for some guy who probably didn't even care about her. "I can't believe this," I muttered, shaking my head. "After everything we've been through, after everything we built together, you're throwing it all away for a fling with some guy?" "It's not a fling," she yelled, her voice breaking. Ryan and I have something real. Something you'll never understand. I stared at her, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. This wasn't the woman I had married, the woman I had loved and trusted. This was someone else entirely, someone who cared more about her own selfish desires than the family we had created together. You're unbelievable, I said finally, my voice low and bitter. I'm done, Sarah. I can't do this anymore. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at Sarah, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was racing, but my body felt like it was stuck in quicksand. Every word she'd thrown at me echoed in my head, boring, predictable, fling. It was like a nightmare that wouldn't end, and the worst part was that it was all real. The first emotion to hit me was anger. Pure, white-hot rage. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to lash out at her for what she'd done. How could she betray me like this? After everything we'd been through, after all the promises we made to each other on our wedding day. It wasn't just about the sex or the affair, it was about the lies. The constant deception, the way she had looked me in the eye and lied to my face every single day. But before I could even open my mouth, the anger gave way to something else, something worse. Sadness. A deep, bone-crushing sadness that settled over me like a thick fog. I thought about all the times I had tried to make her happy, all the little things I did to show her I cared. The dinners I cooked when she came home late, the weekends I spent fixing up the house, the nights I stayed up with her when she was stressed about work. None of it mattered now. She didn't care. She never had that. I sank down onto one of the kitchen chairs, my legs feeling like they were going to give out. Sarah stood there, watching me with an almost bored expression, like she was waiting for me to get over it already. Like this was some minor inconvenience in her otherwise perfect life. Why? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Why did you do this? She shrugged, uncaring. It's not that complicated, Mike. Ryan understands me. He sees my potential. And I don't? I asked, shaking my head. All those years we spent together, building a life, supporting each other, none of that mattered to you? She sighed dramatically, like I was being unreasonable. It's not about you, Mike. It's about me. I'm tired of feeling stuck. I want more out of life. I want to be successful, to have the kind of life I've always dreamed of. And Ryan can give me that. So, it's about money? I asked, my heart sinking. You're willing to throw away everything we had for money? She hesitated, her expression softening slightly. It's not just about money. It's about opportunity. You wouldn't understand. And there it was again, the same excuse, the same dismissal. As if I was beneath her, unworthy of her dreams, her ambitions, that I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, my hands trembling, and walked out of the kitchen. I needed space, needed to get away from her before I said something I would regret. I went into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me, and collapsed onto the bed. The tears came then, hot and fast, streaming down my face as I buried my head in the pillow. I felt like I was drowning in my own grief, suffocating under the weight of her betrayal. How could she do this to me? How could she just toss away everything we had built together for some guy who probably doesn't even love her? For hours, I lay there, replaying every moment of our relationship in my head. The good times, the bad times, the moments where I thought we were truly happy. Now, those memories felt tainted, like they had been poisoned by her lies. I thought about the future we had planned, kids, vacations, growing old together, and realized none of it mattered anymore. It was all gone, replaced by this cold, empty void. The next few days were a blur. I didn't sleep, barely ate, and spent most of my time either staring at the wall or pacing around the house. Sarah was still there, of course, still living under the same roof, still pretending like nothing had changed. She went to work every day, came home late, and acted as if our confrontation had never happened. It was like she was living in some alternate reality where her affair didn't matter, and I was just an inconvenient obstacle she had to deal with. I tried to go to work, but my mind was too scattered. Numbers blurred together on the screen, and I couldn't focus on anything for more than a few seconds before my thoughts drifted back to her. To them. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard Ryan's voice in my head, imagined them together. The thought made me sick, but it also fueled this strange, twisted obsession. I needed to know everything, every detail of their relationship, every lie she had told me, but at the same time, part of me wanted to pretend it wasn't happening. Maybe if I ignored it long enough, it would all just go away. Maybe Sarah would come to her senses, realize what she was throwing away, and we could fix things. We could rebuild our marriage, start over, make things right again. That hope was dangerous, though. Because deep down, I knew it was a fantasy. There was no fixing this. Not after what she had done. Not after the way she had looked at me during that confrontation, like I was nothing more than a nuisance standing in the way of her perfect life. So, I started thinking about leaving. About packing up my stuff, getting out of the house, and starting over somewhere else. But the idea terrified me. What if I left and she didn't care? What if she just shrugged it off and moved on with Ryan without even looking back? The thought of losing her forever, that was almost worse than the betrayal itself. Then, one night, I decided to confront her again. I couldn't take the silence anymore. I needed answers, real answers, not the bullshit excuses she had been feeding me. "Sarah," I said, standing in the doorway of the living room where she was watching TV, completely oblivious to the turmoil inside me. "We need to talk." She glanced up from the screen, annoyed. "What now, Mike?" "I want to know why," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Why did you choose him over me? Why did you throw everything away for some guy who probably doesn't even love you?" She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "You're so dramatic." "It's not like that, Mike. Ryan and we have something special. He understands me. He sees my potential. And I don't?" I asked, my voice cracking. "All those years we spent together, building a life, supporting each other, none of that mattered to you?" She stood up then, crossing her arms defensively. "It's not about you, Mike. It's about me. I'm tired of feeling stuck. I want more out of life. I want to be successful, to have the kind of life I've always dreamed of. And Ryan can give me that." "So, it's about money?" I asked, my heart sinking. "You're willing to throw away everything we had for money?" She hesitated, her expression softening slightly. "It's not just about money. It's about opportunity. You wouldn't understand." And there it was again, the same excuse, the same dismissal. As if I was beneath her, unworthy of her dreams, her ambitions. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I realized that no matter how much I loved her, no matter how hard I tried, I could never be enough for her. She had already made her choice. And it wasn't me. That night, after the conversation, or whatever you want to call it, ended with Sarah's dismissive shrug, I went to bed feeling more defeated than ever. Her words echoed in my head like a broken record. "You wouldn't understand. You're stuck." It was as if she had written me off completely, reducing our entire relationship to nothing more than a stepping stone for her ambitions. Lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I realized something important. I didn't need to fight anymore. I didn't need to beg or plead or try to convince her of anything. She had already made her choice, and no amount of effort on my part was going to change that. The decision came to me slowly, almost reluctantly, but once it took hold, it felt inevitable. I needed to leave. Not just physically, but emotionally too. I needed to walk away from this toxic mess before it consumed what little was left of my sanity. The next morning, I woke up early, before Sarah had even stirred. I moved quietly through the house, packing a small bag with essentials, clothes, toiletries, some documents. As I packed, I couldn't help but glance around at the life we had built together. Our wedding photos, the framed pictures of vacations we'd taken, the little trinkets and mementos that had once meant so much to us. Now, they all felt like relics of a time that had long since passed. That I left a note on the kitchen counter, simple and to the point: "I'm leaving. We'll figure out the rest later." It wasn't poetic, but it didn't need to be. There was nothing left to say. As I walked out the door, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, mostly, but also a deep, gnawing sadness. This was my home. These were my things. And now, I was walking away from it all. That I drove aimlessly for a while, not really knowing where I was going. Eventually, I ended up at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It was dingy and depressing, but it was better than going back. I checked into a room and sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe, but the pain was still there, raw and overwhelming. Every thought led back to Sarah, to Ryan, to the betrayal. I kept replaying every moment of our marriage, wondering where it had all gone wrong. Was it something I did? Something I didn't do? Or was it just inevitable, like she said, just two people growing apart? The truth was, I still loved her. Despite everything, despite the lies and the cheating and the way she had treated me, I still cared about her. But love wasn't enough anymore. Not when she had chosen someone else over me. Not when she had thrown away everything we had worked for without a second thought. Over the next few days, I tried to get my bearings. I called in sick to work, telling them I needed some personal time. I spent most of my time lying on that lumpy motel bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. Friends reached out, asking if I was okay, offering support, but I didn't have the energy to talk to anyone. I just wanted to be alone, to sort through the chaos in my mind. Eventually, though, reality started creeping back in. I couldn't stay at the motel forever. I needed to figure out what came next. So, I called a lawyer, a friend of a friend who specialized in family law. He listened patiently as I explained the situation, offering advice on how to handle the divorce proceedings. It was surreal, talking about splitting assets and custody arrangements for our son Jake like it was just another business transaction. But that's what it had come to. The first few weeks after leaving Sarah were the hardest. I was living in this tiny, soulless motel room, surrounded by beige walls and the constant hum of traffic outside. Every morning, I woke up to the same bleak reality: my marriage was over, and I had no idea what came next. At first, I felt like I was in a fog. My mind was constantly racing, replaying every moment with Sarah, every argument, every lie, every time she had looked at me with that cold indifference. I couldn't escape it. It was like being trapped in a nightmare you can't wake up from. I tried to distract myself. I binge-watched TV shows, went for long walks around town, even started reading again, something I hadn't done since before all this mess began. But no matter what I did, the pain was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to strike when I least expected it. Loneliness became my constant companion. I missed having someone to talk to, someone to share my day with, even if it was just about mundane things like work or the weather. I missed the little moments, the way Sarah used to laugh at my dumb jokes, the way we'd cuddle on the couch during movie nights. Those memories haunted me, reminding me of everything I had lost. And then there was the anger. Oh, the anger. It would hit me in waves, usually when I least expected it. I'd be walking down the street, minding my own business, when suddenly I'd remember something Sarah had said or done, and the rage would surge through me like a tidal wave. I'd clench my fists, grit my teeth, and have to fight the urge to scream or punch something. How could she do this to me? How could she throw away everything we had for some guy who probably didn't even care about her? But as the days turned into weeks, something strange started to happen. The anger began to fade, slowly but surely. It didn't disappear completely, not by any means, but it became more manageable. Instead of overwhelming me, it became a reminder of why I had left in the first place. I wasn't going to let her or Ryan define my life anymore. around this time, I started seeing a therapist. It wasn't something I had planned, but after one particularly rough night where I found myself crying uncontrollably in the middle of the motel room, I realized I needed help. So, I made an appointment with a local counselor who specialized in relationship issues. At first, I was skeptical. Talking about my feelings wasn't exactly my strong suit. But as the sessions went on, I started to open up. I told her everything: the affair, the lies, the way Sarah had treated me like I was nothing. And for the first time in months, I felt like someone actually understood what I was going through. Through therapy, I began to understand that healing wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending it never happened. It was about accepting it, embracing it, and using it to grow. I learned that it was okay to feel angry, to feel sad, to feel lost. These emotions were part of the process, and pushing them away would only make things worse. Slowly but surely, I started to rebuild my life. I moved out of the motel and into a small apartment closer to work. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with a tiny kitchen and a view of the parking lot, but it was mine. I decorated it with some of my favorite books and a few photos of family and friends, trying to create a space that felt like home again. That I also started reconnecting with people. I reached out to old friends, ones I hadn't spoken to in years, and gradually re-entered the world I had isolated myself from. They were supportive, offering a listening ear whenever I needed to vent or just hang out. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. Of course, there were still moments when the pain would come flooding back. Like when I got the divorce papers in the mail, or when I heard through mutual friends that Sarah and Ryan were now officially a couple. Those moments hurt, no doubt about it. But they didn't break me anymore. I had learned to live with the pain, to acknowledge it without letting it control me. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Slowly but surely, I began to carve out a new life for myself, one that didn't revolve around Sarah or her betrayal. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of setbacks along the way. Some nights, I'd find myself lying awake, replaying old memories in my head, wondering if things could have been different. Other times, I'd see something that reminded me of her: a song on the radio, a familiar scent, even just a random woman walking down the street who looked vaguely like her, and it would hit me like a punch to the gut. But as time went on, those moments became fewer and farther between. I started to realize that moving on wasn't about forgetting what had happened, it was about accepting it and finding a way to live with it. One of the biggest changes came when I finally stopped avoiding work. After taking some time off, I returned to the office, hoping that getting back into my routine would help distract me from everything else. To my surprise, it did more than that. Work became an escape, a place where I could focus on something other than my personal problems. I threw myself into projects, took on extra responsibilities, and even started networking with colleagues I hadn't really connected with before. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was making progress, both professionally and personally. It also helped that I had a few good friends by my side. One of them, Dan, had gone through a similar situation a couple of years ago when his ex-wife cheated on him. He understood what I was going through better than anyone else, and he was always there to listen whenever I needed to talk. We started hanging out more often, grabbing beers after work, playing pickup basketball at the local gym, even taking weekend trips to nearby towns just to get away from it all. Having someone who truly got it made a world of difference. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, I tried to stay as detached as possible. My lawyer handled most of the details, which was a relief because dealing with Sarah directly was the last thing I wanted to do. We exchanged a few emails here and there, mostly about logistics, dividing up assets, figuring out custody arrangements for Jake, and finalizing the terms of our separation. Every interaction was tense and awkward, but I tried not to let it get under my skin. This was business now, nothing more. There were still moments when the anger bubbled up, though. Like when I found out that Ryan had bought Sarah a brand new car as a gift shortly after their affair became public knowledge. Or when I saw pictures of them together on social media, looking disgustingly happy and in love. Those moments stung, no doubt about it. But instead of letting them consume me, I started channeling that energy into something positive. I signed up for a fitness class at the local gym, started cooking healthier meals, and even picked up a new hobby: photography. It was something I had always been interested in but never had the time to pursue. Now, I spent weekends wandering around town with my camera, capturing little moments of beauty wherever I could find them. It was therapeutic, in a way, helping me focus on the present rather than dwelling on the past. And then there was dating. I wasn't sure I was ready for it at first, but after a few months of living on my own, I started thinking about it more seriously. Not because I was desperate to find someone new, but because I realized that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life alone. I dipped my toe in cautiously, creating a profile on a dating app and going on a few low-pressure dates. Most of them didn't go anywhere, some were awkward, others just plain boring, but a few actually showed promise. There was one woman in particular, Laura, who I connected with surprisingly well. She was smart, funny, and had this quiet confidence about her that I found incredibly attractive. We went on a few dates, nothing too serious, but it felt good to be around someone who appreciated me for who I was. Of course, there were moments of doubt. What if I wasn't ready? What if I ended up getting hurt again? But I reminded myself that I couldn't let fear dictate my life. If I wanted to move on, I had to take risks. I had to trust that I deserved better than what Sarah had given me. As the months passed, I started to notice subtle changes within myself. I was more confident, more self-assured. I no longer felt like I was stuck in limbo, waiting for something to happen. Instead, I was actively shaping my own future, making decisions based on what I wanted rather than what someone else expected of me. It was liberating, in a way, to realize that my happiness didn't depend on anyone else anymore. It wasn't a single, defining moment when I suddenly felt free from the weight of Sarah's betrayal. Instead, it was a gradual process, one that unfolded over time as I slowly pieced my life back together. But there were certain moments, little epiphanies, if you will, that stood out along the way, each one bringing me closer to that elusive sense of peace. One such moment happened on a crisp autumn afternoon about 6 months after I had left Sarah. I had taken Jake and our dog, Max, for a walk in the park near my apartment, something we did almost every day. The leaves were changing colors, and the air had that distinct fall scent, a mix of damp earth and wood smoke. As I strolled along the path, watching Jake chase after squirrels with his usual enthusiasm, I realized something important: I was happy. Not in some grand, life-changing way, but in a quiet, understated sort of happiness. I was enjoying the simplicity of the moment, the cool breeze on my face, the sound of birds chirping in the trees, the way Jake looked up at me with those big, trusting eyes, waiting for a treat. It struck me then that this was enough. I didn't need anything more to feel content. I didn't need Sarah or Ryan or anyone else to validate my worth. All I needed was right here, in this moment, with my son by my side and the world around me. It was a small realization, but it felt monumental. Another turning point came a few weeks later, when I received the final divorce papers in the mail. I remember sitting on my couch, staring at the envelope for what felt like an eternity before finally opening it. Inside were all the legal documents, signed and notarized, officially ending my marriage to Sarah. For a brief moment, I felt that familiar pang of sadness and anger. But then something unexpected happened. I started laughing. It wasn't a bitter, cynical laugh, but a genuine one, light and almost joyful. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The constant tension, the lingering uncertainty, the fear of what might happen next, it was all gone. The divorce was finalized, and with it, the last remnants of my old life were put to rest. I called Dan later that evening to share the news. "It's done," I told him, still feeling a bit giddy. "The divorce is final." "Good for you, man," he said, his voice warm and supportive. "You've come so far. You should be proud of yourself." And you know what? I was. I really was. It hadn't been easy, and there were days when I thought I'd never make it through. But here I was, standing on the other side, stronger and more resilient than ever. I had faced the worst kind of betrayal and come out the other end, not broken, but whole. Around this time, I also started thinking more seriously about dating again. Laura and I had continued seeing each other casually, and while things were still relatively new, there was a connection between us that felt real and meaningful. We went on a few dates, nothing too serious, but it felt good to be around someone who appreciated me for who I was. But even as I allowed myself to think about the possibility of a future with someone new, I knew that my healing wasn't tied to finding another person. It was about finding myself first. I had spent so much of my relationship with Sarah trying to be what she wanted me to be, sacrificing pieces of myself along the way. Now, I was reclaiming those pieces, rediscovering who I truly was without the weight of her expectations or her lies. There were still bad days, of course. Days when the memories of Sarah and Ryan would come flooding back, triggering waves of anger and sadness. But those days became fewer and farther between. And when they did happen, I no longer let them define me. I acknowledged the pain, gave myself permission to feel it, and then moved on. Because that's what healing is, learning to live with the scars without letting them control your life. Here I am, sitting in my small but cozy apartment, with Max curled up at my feet. It's been almost a year since I left Sarah, and the journey from that dark place to where I am now has been anything but easy. But it's also been one of the most transformative experiences of my life. I remember the day I signed the final divorce papers like it was yesterday. I stood there, pen in hand, staring at the signature line as if it held the answers to all the questions I'd been asking myself for months. Was this really the end? Could I finally let go of everything we had built together? The weight of those papers felt heavier than any burden I had ever carried, but as I pressed the pen to the paper, something shifted inside me. A door closed, and another one opened slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. The days that followed were filled with moments of quiet reflection. I spent a lot of time thinking about what had happened, trying to make sense of it all. There were nights when I would sit by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, wondering how things had gone so wrong. How could someone I loved so deeply turn into a stranger before my very eyes? How could she throw away everything we had worked for without a second thought? But then, something changed. It wasn't a sudden realization or a dramatic epiphany. It was more subtle, like the first signs of spring after a long, harsh winter. One day, I woke up and realized that the pain wasn't as sharp anymore. The memories still lingered, of course, but they no longer consumed me. I could think about Sarah and Ryan without feeling like my world was crumbling around me. I could look back on our marriage without drowning in regret. And then came the day I least expected, the day I truly felt free. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I had taken Jake and Max for a walk in the park. The sun was shining, casting a golden glow over everything, and the air smelled faintly of pine and fresh earth. As I walked along the path, I noticed something unusual: a couple sitting on a bench, holding hands and laughing. They looked so happy, so carefree, and for a moment, I felt a pang of envy. But then, something strange happened. Instead of letting that envy consume me, I smiled. I actually smiled. In that moment, I realized something profound. I didn't need Sarah anymore. I didn't need her love, her approval, or her validation. I didn't need anyone else to define my worth. For the first time in years, I felt whole, complete in a way I hadn't known was possible. It was as if I had been carrying a heavy load for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to be unburdened. And now, I was free. That night, I sat down at my desk and wrote Sarah a letter. It wasn't an angry rant or a bitter goodbye. It was a simple, heartfelt message, thanking her for the good times we had shared and wishing her well in her new life. I didn't send it right away. I just left it on my desk, knowing that someday, I might feel ready to let it go. A few weeks later, I did. I sealed the envelope, addressed it, and dropped it in the mailbox. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not because I was hoping for a response or expecting anything from her, but because I knew I had done what I needed to do. I had said my piece, and now, it was time to move on. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself thinking less and less about Sarah and Ryan. My life began to take shape in ways I never imagined. I started seeing Laura more regularly, and though we kept things casual, there was something real between us. Something genuine. We laughed together, talked about our dreams, and supported each other in ways that felt natural and effortless. One evening, after a particularly meaningful conversation, Laura turned to me with a soft smile and asked, "Do you think you'll ever be able to trust again?" I paused for a moment, considering her question. Trust had always been a fragile thing for me, something I had guarded carefully after everything that had happened. But as I looked into her eyes, I realized something important. Trust wasn't about finding someone who would never hurt me, it was about being brave enough to open my heart again, even knowing the risks. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to try." And that's when it hit me, the full weight of everything I had been through. The betrayal, the pain, the anger, the sadness, it had all led me to this moment. This moment of vulnerability, of hope, of possibility. But as I sat there with Laura, watching the moonlight filter through the trees outside, I realized that while I had found peace, the battle for my heart was far from over, because healing isn't linear. It's not about erasing the past or pretending it never happened. It's about learning from it, growing stronger because of it. And sometimes, just sometimes, you find peace in the most unexpected places. So, here's what I've learned from all of this. First, you can't control everything. No matter how much you try to protect yourself or your relationship, sometimes things fall apart in ways you never saw coming. That doesn't mean you failed, it means life is unpredictable, and that's okay. Second, it's okay to ask for help. Whether it's from friends, family, or a professional, reaching out for support is a sign of strength, not weakness. You don't have to go through this alone. Third, trust yourself. After everything that happened, I doubted myself more times than I can count. But eventually, I learned to trust my instincts again. If something feels off, it probably is. Listen to that inner voice. Fourth, forgive, but don't forget. Forgiving Sarah helped me heal, but I won't forget what she did. It's part of my story now, and it's shaped who I am today. Learning from it doesn't mean excusing it. Lastly, new beginnings are possible. Even after the deepest wounds, there's always a chance to start over. It might not look the way you expected, but that doesn't make it any less beautiful. To anyone reading this who's going through something similar, know that you're not alone. It's okay to feel lost, angry, or sad. It's okay to take your time healing. And most importantly, it's okay to find happiness again, even if it looks different than you thought it would. Here I am, a year later, sitting in my living room with Jake laughing on the floor beside me and Max snoring softly at my feet. Life isn't perfect, far from it, but it's mine. And that's enough. The seasons have changed, as they always do, and with them, so has my perspective. I've come to understand that healing is not about erasing the past or pretending it never happened, it's about integrating those experiences into who you are now. The betrayal still stings sometimes, like an old scar that twinges in cold weather. But it no longer defines me. Instead, it reminds me of how far I've come, of the strength I never knew I had. Sarah? She's moved on, as have I. We've settled into a new normal, co-parenting Jake without the drama or bitterness of the past. It's not easy, but it's manageable. We've found a way to communicate, to put our son first, even if we can't be the couple we once were. There are moments when I see her with Ryan, and it still hurts, but it's a dull ache now, one I can bear without crumbling. The letter I sent her? She never responded directly, but I did get that brief text, a simple acknowledgement, nothing more. In some ways, that was enough. It was closure, not in the form of grand apologies or dramatic reconciliations, but in the quiet acceptance that we had both moved on in our own ways. Some things don't need a reply. Sometimes, silence speaks volumes. Laura and I. We're still seeing each other, though we take things slow. She's patient with me, understanding that trust takes time to rebuild. We've shared moments of laughter, comfort, and even vulnerability. It's different this time, less about trying to fill a void and more about finding someone who complements who I've become. She doesn't try to fix me or change me, she just accepts me for who I am, flaws and all. It's refreshing, and for the first time in a long while, I feel hopeful about the future. The betrayal, the lies, the pain, they're all part of my story now. They've shaped me, yes, but they don't control me anymore. I've learned that life goes on, even after the worst betrayals. You can pick up the pieces, even if they don't fit together the same way they used to. You can find joy again, even if it looks different than you expected. To anyone out there feeling lost, betrayed, or broken, know this: healing is possible. It's slow, messy, and full of setbacks, but it happens. You will find peace, even if it looks different than you imagined. You'll learn to trust yourself again, to listen to your instincts, and to recognize when something or someone isn't right for you. You'll discover that you're stronger than you ever thought possible, and that you deserve better than what was taken from you. There will be days when the memories come flooding back, when the anger and sadness resurface. But those moments will pass, just like everything else. And in between, you'll find moments of beauty, of laughter, of connection. You'll realize that life is still worth living, even after the deepest wounds. I've learned to embrace the uncertainty, to accept that not everything will go according to plan. But that's okay. Life is unpredictable, and that's what makes it interesting. You'll stumble, you'll fall, but you'll also rise again. And with each step forward, you'll grow a little stronger, a little wiser. In the end, the only person I needed to forgive was myself. I had to let go of the guilt, the self-doubt, the endless questioning of what I could have done differently. I had to accept that sometimes, despite our best efforts, things fall apart. And that's not a reflection of your worth, it's just life. So here I am, sitting in my living room, surrounded by the people and things that matter most. My heart still bears the scars of betrayal, but it's also filled with hope. I'm learning to love again, not just others, but myself. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest lesson of all.